Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Frozen Exile. Princess Ilara's body lay motionless on the icy surface of the distant moon, her breath coming in ragged gasps as snowflakes swirled around her like vultures. She had been left to die, abandoned by her father, the mighty King Akhtar of the Author, a ruler whose power extended across multiple star systems, but whose cruelty was well known. Her crime? Defying his commands, questioning his methods, and daring to seek a life beyond his authoritarian reach. As Ilara's blood mixed with the frozen dirt beneath her, she could taste the sharp sting of betrayal. Her father, who had always claimed to love her, had cast her aside like some discarded artifact. No amount of pleading, no arguments or soft whispers of diplomacy had softened his heart. He had used her as a pawn for his ambitions, and now her defiance had cost her everything. His final words echoed in her mind, "You are no daughter of mine. Leave this world as an outcast and do not return." The Othorian royal ships had departed without a second glance, leaving her stranded on Ritherix, an inhospitable, frozen world at the edge of the Author Empire. She had never thought her life would end like this, cold, alone, and forgotten. Her only company was the whisper of wind and the unyielding landscape stretching endlessly around her. A bone-deep ache gnawed at her, a mixture of physical pain and heartache. She was done for. But just as Ilara's vision blurred, and the blackness crept into the corners of her mind, something shifted. A distant sound reached her ears, low and rumbling, like a thunderous growl breaking the silence. A vehicle. Her ears strained against the cold, but there it was again, closer now. She squinted her eyes and saw a distant shape moving through the blinding storm. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be one of her father's ships returning? Perhaps they had reconsidered. But no, this was too small, and it moved with an agility she knew well wasn't suited for any of the Othorian crafts. The shape grew closer, and as it approached she could make out the silhouette of a human figure. A human? On Ritherix? Her breath caught in her chest, and despite her fading strength she pushed herself up, her hands scraping the icy ground for leverage. The snow and wind howled around her, yet the figure did not retreat. It continued forward, determined, unyielding. The human was dressed in dark, reinforced combat gear, the fabric weathered from a lifetime of use. The figure paused only for a moment, their eyes scanning the desolate landscape before locking onto her, a flicker of recognition passing through their gaze. Then without hesitation they approached, swift and purposeful. Ilara couldn't help the bitter laugh that bubbled from her throat. Of all the things, she had never expected a human to be her salvation. The humans were known for their resilience, their brutal adaptability to any situation. Their species had once been seen as inferior, weak. Yet in recent years, they had shown themselves to be a force to be reckoned with. Perhaps that's why they had come here, intrigued by a planet on the edge of nowhere. Perhaps they sought to conquer or to understand. Yet, as the human reached her, kneeling in the snow, she realized one thing: they weren't here for conquest. They were here for something else entirely. The human spoke, their voice cutting through the storm like a calm beacon. "You're not from here," they said, their voice smooth but laced with concern. Ilara tried to lift her head, but the weight of exhaustion and the cold made her muscles scream in protest. She could barely keep her eyes open. "Why?" Her voice cracked, barely audible above the wind. The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, they gently lifted her with surprising strength, cradling her against their chest. She could feel the heat of their body through their armor, and for a moment, it was enough to stave off the cold that had already begun to claim her. "Don't speak," the human said. "I've got you." Ilara wanted to argue, to demand why this human was here, why they were saving her. But her mind was clouded, her thoughts scattered. She leaned into their warmth, and though it should have been uncomfortable, the closeness was oddly comforting. The human carried her with effortless grace, moving as though they had done this 100 times before. Ilara's head lulled against their shoulder, and she allowed herself a brief moment of rest, her body sinking into the safety of their embrace. What kind of human was this? Her thoughts were hazy, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this person was different from any other human she had ever encountered. They didn't act as though they were frightened by the vastness of the universe. They weren't concerned with politics or power. They were here now simply to help her. That was all. As they moved forward, the sound of the storm softened. The icy winds did not feel as cutting. The snow seemed to part before them like an invisible path. Ilara tried to focus, her heart slowly warming despite her condition. This human. They had saved her. But what would happen next? Would they simply drop her off at some human outpost? Would they leave her to live out the rest of her life as an unknown among their people? No. She knew better than that. They would not be so kind without expecting something in return. "Who are you?" she whispered, too weak to ask any other question. The human didn't answer right away, instead shifting their grip on her as they continued forward. The harsh winds were now behind them, the starlight above casting a serene glow on the frozen world. "I'm someone who knows what it's like to be alone," they said quietly. Ilara's breath hitched. Alone. That was a feeling she knew all too well. But this felt different. Her mind raced, trying to piece together who this human was, what they wanted. The questions would come later. For now, she simply allowed herself to rest, trusting the strange human who had come to her aid on this desolate world. And somewhere deep within her, a flicker of hope stirred, a hope she had thought long extinguished. The human's secret. Ilara awoke to a warmth unlike any she had ever experienced. It was a softness that curled around her, sheltering her from the freezing winds of Ritherix and the harsh, unyielding memories of her betrayal. She could feel the warmth of the human's body beside her, and as she shifted slightly, she realized that she was no longer outside in the brutal cold. Instead, she lay on what felt like soft blankets, an unfamiliar but welcome sensation. Her eyelids fluttered open slowly, her head still pounding as her body adjusted to consciousness. She wasn't sure how long she had been unconscious, but her limbs felt less numb, her breath more steady. It took a moment for her eyes to focus, but when they did, she was met with the sight of a small, dimly lit shelter. The walls were made of smooth, unfamiliar material, a stark contrast to the harsh ice planet outside. There was a faint hum of machinery in the background, and the air was warm, suffocatingly so. She shifted, realizing that the human was still beside her. Their presence was both comforting and unsettling. She had expected them to leave her once they had transported her to safety, but they had stayed. "You're awake?" The human's voice broke through her thoughts. Ilara turned her head to find the human sitting at a small table nearby, their back turned but their attention on her. They had removed their helmet, revealing a face that was weathered but kind. Their features were sharp, their jaw strong, and their eyes, dark and steady, held an almost unreadable quality. "Why are you still here?" Ilara asked, her voice hoarse, the words coming out in a rasp. "Why didn't you just leave me?" The human sighed, standing up and walking over to her, bringing with them a small container of what appeared to be food, some sort of thick brown paste that gave off a strong, earthy scent. "Eat," they instructed, kneeling beside her. "You need to regain your strength before we talk." Ilara eyed the food suspiciously, but, driven by hunger, she reluctantly took the container from them. Her stomach growled at the sight of it, and despite its unappetizing appearance, she had little choice but to eat. As she took a small bite, the taste surprised her. It was bland but nourishing, like a warm balm for her aching insides. She finished it quickly, not wanting to appear weak, though the effort left her exhausted. "I'm not going to ask you for anything," the human finally said, their voice quieter now. "I don't care about your empire or your politics. I care about you. For now, that's all that matters." Ilara's brow furrowed. "But why? I'm no one. I'm just a princess whose father decided to cast her away. My people would have no reason to care about a human." The human's gaze softened and they leaned back, studying her. "You're not just a princess. You're someone who made a choice. You defied your father, your king. I admire that." Ilara didn't know what to say to that. She had expected pity or indifference, perhaps even disdain. But admiration? It was almost humbling. "What's your name?" she asked after a long pause, her voice quieter this time, a curiosity beginning to stir within her. The human hesitated, as though the question itself held weight. "Reed," they finally said. "My name is Reed." "Reed?" Ilara repeated, savoring the word on her tongue. She had been surrounded by titles and formalities her entire life, but this felt real. Simple. Honest. "Why did you come here?" she pressed, her mind racing. "Why did you save me?" Reed's expression darkened, his eyes hardening for a moment before softening again. He took a deep breath, and Ilara could sense that he was deciding how much to share with her. "I wasn't always this person you see now," Reed said quietly. "Once I was part of a military unit, a unit meant to be a part of a larger human effort. My people have been at war with the author for years. It's not something I'm proud of." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The author, her people, at war with humans? It was a revelation that sent a chill through her, far colder than the planet outside. She had always been taught that the humans were primitive, not worth acknowledging beyond the occasional skirmish on the borders of the Author Empire. You were fighting against my people? She asked, trying to process what Reed had said. Reed nodded, looking away. At one point, yes. But I got tired of it. Tired of the constant killing, the senseless violence. I deserted, and I've been running ever since. His gaze returned to her, and there was an intensity in it that made Alara feel as though he was stripping away the facade she had so carefully built around herself. When I saw you lying out there in the snow, I saw something in you. Someone who had been abandoned by their own. I couldn't just leave you. Alara stared at him, struggling to comprehend the depth of his words. A deserter? A former soldier, now at odds with everything he had once fought for? It was hard to reconcile this person before her with the faceless enemy she had always been taught to despise. But what about your people? She asked, the questions tumbling from her lips. What will they think when they find out you're harboring me? A princess of the Author? Reed's lips twisted into something between a smirk and a sigh. They won't find out. I'll make sure of it. But they will, Alara insisted. They'll come for you. And they'll come for me too. Reed's expression hardened again, but this time there was resolve in it. Then we'll face them together. Alara blinked. She had expected him to be afraid, to back down. But there was no fear in Reed's eyes. There was only a quiet, unwavering certainty. I don't understand, Alara whispered, her voice cracking. Why are you doing this? You have no reason to help me. Reed leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. Maybe I'm helping you because I see in you what I've been running from. Power. Control. Authority. Those things ruin lives. I learned that the hard way. But you, he paused, his voice softening, you have a chance to change all that. A chance to choose a different path. Alara looked away, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Reed was right in a way. Her entire life had been dictated by others. By her father, her position, her bloodline. She had always been a tool, an object to be used for political gain. And now, here she was, stranded on the edge of a frozen world, with only a human deserter as her companion. Why should I trust you? She asked quietly, her voice tinged with doubt. Reed's eyes softened once again and he reached out, placing a hand gently on hers. Because, just like you, I've learned the value of trust the hard way. The weight of his words settled on her, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alara allowed herself to hope again. The hidden resistance. The days that followed felt like a blur. Ilara's body slowly recovered from the ordeal, but her mind remained in a state of constant turmoil. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of her father's cold face haunted her. The dismissal, the scorn, the absolute certainty in his eyes that she was no longer worthy of his love, his protection, or his title. She had been nothing but a pawn in his game, and now that game had left her stranded on an alien world with only a human deserter as her ally. Reed had proven himself to be more than just a rescuer. He was a force of nature, quietly intense and relentlessly driven. In the days after her recovery, he had shown her the small, concealed shelter he had built, an underground cavern carved from the icy rock of Ritherix. It was far from comfortable, but it was functional, equipped with scavenged supplies, weapons, and enough food to last for several months. For now, it was their sanctuary. The more time Alara spent with him, the more she realized that Reed wasn't simply hiding from the Author Empire. He was hiding from something far more dangerous. A rebellion. She had suspected as much after hearing the fragments of his conversations, the cryptic references to a network of humans who operated in the shadows, working against the powerful systems that sought to control the galaxy. Reed had been part of it, a soldier once but now a fugitive who had turned his back on the war to help those caught in the crossfire. I didn't ask to be part of this fight, Reed had told her one night as they sat by a small fire. But the longer I stayed in the military, the more I saw the truth behind the propaganda. The Author Empire isn't just conquering planets, they're wiping out whole civilizations, eradicating entire species without remorse. And your father, he's the worst of them all. Alara had remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Her father had always presented himself as a protector of his people, a king who governed with iron-handed justice. She had never questioned his rule, even though it had often felt oppressive and suffocating. But the more she listened to Reed, the more she began to understand the true cost of that empire. I had to make a choice, Reed had continued, his voice growing colder with each word. I couldn't keep fighting for an empire that destroyed everything in its path. I had to get out. And when I saw you lying out there in the snow, I knew you were running from the same thing. Alara had looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time in her life she saw beyond his appearance, beyond the hardened exterior, beyond the soldier's armor. She saw a man who had lost everything, someone who had sacrificed his own future for what he believed in. It was a stark contrast to her own life, where her every decision had been dictated by her royal bloodline, her status as the daughter of a king. One morning as she awoke from a restless sleep, Reed was already up, poring over a set of maps spread across the table. His brow furrowed in concentration as he traced his finger along a path that wound across several star systems. Ilara sat up slowly, the warmth from the fire still lingering in the air, and watched him for a moment before speaking. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. Reed looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm planning our next move," he said, his tone steady. "We need to contact the Resistance. There are people out there who can help us, people who have the resources and the knowledge to take down the Author Empire from the inside." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She had heard whispers of the human resistance, but to think that she might become involved in it, the daughter of the very empire she had spent her life serving, was almost too much to grasp. "You're talking about rebellion," she said, her voice low. "Against my father. Against everything I've ever known." Reed didn't flinch. "Your father is a tyrant, Ilara. You don't have to stay loyal to him. He betrayed you just as much as he's betrayed the rest of his people." Ilara swallowed hard, the words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. For so long she had been bound by duty, by the obligation to honor her bloodline, to follow her father's commands. But now, sitting in this tiny underground shelter, surrounded by the cold and the desolation of Ritherix, the truth was beginning to sink in. Her father's cruelty, his unyielding grip on power, had cost her everything. And it would cost countless others too if he was allowed to continue. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Reed said as though reading her thoughts. "I'm asking you to fight with us. Your knowledge of the Author Empire could be the key to bringing it down." Ilara stood up, her legs weak but steady as she approached the table. She looked down at the maps Reed had spread out, at the complex web of planets and systems that connected the Author Empire. Her fingers traced the paths, her mind racing. She knew these systems. She had been to most of them, attended countless royal meetings, diplomatic negotiations, all for the benefit of the empire her father ruled. And now those same systems were her enemy. "I don't know if I can do this," she said softly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Reed looked up at her, his eyes unwavering. "You've already made the hardest choice, Ilara. You've already chosen to walk away from the life you knew. The rest of it, the fighting, the strategy, the resistance, that's just the next step. And you don't have to do it alone." Ilara felt a flicker of something inside her, a spark of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope that she could be more than the princess her father had molded her to be. Hope that she could help make a difference in a galaxy that seemed on the brink of collapse. "But where do we start?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed smiled, the faintest glimmer of approval in his eyes. "We start by contacting the human resistance. I know where they're based, on the planet Centurion deep within Author space. It'll be dangerous but it's our best chance." Ilara nodded, the weight of the decision settling over her. She had made the choice to leave behind her former life. But now, the path ahead seemed even more uncertain, and yet, in her chest, a new kind of resolve began to form. The empire she had once been destined to rule no longer felt like home. The man who had once been her father no longer seemed like a protector, but a tyrant. The only place she could go now was forward. And with Reed by her side, she would take the first step into the unknown, into a future where the Author Empire might one day fall, and perhaps, with it, the reign of her father. "We leave tomorrow," Reed said, standing up and gathering the maps. Ilara didn't respond immediately, but as she turned toward the door of the shelter, a sense of determination settled over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to find out. Into the heart of the Empire. The journey to Centurion began in silence, the kind of silence that pressed down on Ilara's chest, making her feel as though the entire universe was holding its breath. Reed had taken the lead, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an edge of urgency that she couldn't ignore. They had carefully planned their escape from the shelter. No loud engines, no flashing signals, only the quiet hum of the small shuttle that Reed had salvaged. It was old, patched together from various ships that had crashed over the years, but it was fast and maneuverable. 4 days they had traveled through the vast emptiness of space, avoiding Author patrols and navigating through asteroid fields and debris. Reed was a skilled pilot, and Ilara quickly learned that there was little he couldn't do with a ship. He had taught her how to navigate the shuttle's systems, how to read star maps and calibrate the engines for stealth maneuvers. The more they traveled, the more Ilara felt her old self slipping away, replaced by someone stronger, someone willing to fight for something greater than just survival. Still, doubts gnawed at the edges of her mind. She had been raised in the heart of the Author Empire, surrounded by luxury and power, and now she was being thrust into the chaos of a rebellion, a world of resistance and secrecy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Every step forward felt like a step further away from the life she had once known. The shuttle's comm system crackled to life, and Reed's voice cut through the quiet hum of the engines. "We're approaching Centurion. We need to go dark for the final approach. The Author Empire's surveillance network will be watching." Ilara's stomach twisted. Centurion was one of the most heavily monitored planets in the galaxy, and it was located deep within Author space. A planet of immense strategic value, it had been fortified with advanced defense systems, ensuring that anyone who dared approach was met with an overwhelming show of force. The thought of walking right into the heart of enemy territory was unsettling, but Ilara pushed the fear aside. The rebellion needed her, and she had no choice but to follow through. "Understood," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside her. Reed worked quickly, flipping switches and tapping commands into the shuttle's console. The lights flickered and dimmed, and the ship's engines quieted to a near whisper. Ilara watched him, noting the calmness in his movements, the ease with which he took control of every situation. He was a man who had lived through countless dangers, and yet there was something unspoken in his eyes, a kind of silent resolve that told her he had no intention of failing. Not now, and not with her by his side. They glided through the void of space like shadows, their small shuttle blending into the endless black. It felt like hours before they finally began to descend toward Centurion, the planet's surface coming into view as a sprawling metropolis of steel and glass. It was a far cry from the frozen world of Ritherix, and yet it felt just as cold. Beyond the gleaming surface, there was a deep, oppressive atmosphere of control and surveillance. Everywhere Ilara looked, she could see the signs of the Author Empire's iron grip. Enormous towers, military strongholds, and the looming presence of warships that circled above like vultures. They landed on a hidden pad beneath a thick layer of foliage, the kind of secret location that Reed had described when he spoke of the underground resistance. The shuttle's landing gear sank into the soft soil with a muted thud, and Reed immediately moved to check the external sensors, ensuring that no one had followed them. Ilara took a deep breath as the shuttle's door opened. The air smelled different here, damp and earthy with the faintest trace of industrial exhaust. She stepped out onto the planet's surface, feeling the solid ground beneath her boots. The transition from space to solid Earth was jarring, but it also grounded her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. "Welcome to Centurion," Reed said, his voice low as he adjusted his gear. "Stay close and don't speak unless I say so. This place is crawling with spies, Author sympathizers, and informants. We can't afford to draw attention." Ilara nodded, her heart pounding. This was it, the first real step into the rebellion. They would meet with the resistance leaders here, and Reed had warned her that things wouldn't be easy. The humans had been fighting for years, but they were still vastly outnumbered by the Author forces. Centurion was their stronghold, their last hope of keeping the rebellion alive. The path they followed was narrow, winding through a dense forest of trees that seemed to grow up from the planet's surface like twisted monuments. The air felt heavy, the quiet broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional rustle of wind through the leaves. It was a strange feeling, being so close to the heart of the Author Empire, yet surrounded by an atmosphere of secrecy and hidden danger. Ilara had never known fear like this. As they approached a hidden entrance carved into the side of a mountain, Reed paused. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Remember," he said, his voice low, "we don't know who's watching. You can't let anything slip. No matter what happens, don't reveal who you are." Ilara nodded, her heart beating faster. She had never been good at lying, and the weight of the deception pressed on her chest like a heavy stone. She was used to being recognized, used to the privileges that came with her status as the princess of the Author. But here she was just another rebel, just another face in the crowd. They entered the underground base, the air growing cooler as they descended into the depths of the mountain. The base was dark and cramped, the walls lined with makeshift furniture and equipment. Soldiers and technicians moved quickly around them, exchanging hushed words and checking various devices. It was a far cry from the lavish royal chambers Ilara had grown up in, but there was a certain ruggedness to the place, a kind of raw energy that made her feel strangely alive. Reed led her through the maze of corridors until they reached a large room at the far end of the base. Inside, a group of humans were gathered around a table, their faces grim and focused. As soon as Reed entered, all eyes turned to him, their expressions wary but not hostile. "This is Ilara," Reed said, gesturing to her. She's here to help us. The room fell silent. Elara could feel the weight of their gaze, the uncertainty in the air. She had expected resistance, but the intensity of their scrutiny still caught her off guard. A tall man, his face hardened by years of conflict, stood up from the table. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Elara, and she could sense the mistrust in his gaze. "You brought her here?" the man asked, his voice sharp. "She's an author princess. You do realize what kind of danger that puts us in, don't you?" Reed's face remained calm. "I know the risks, but she's more than just a princess. She's one of the few people who has the knowledge we need to infiltrate the author empire from the inside. If we don't use that knowledge, we'll lose this fight before it even begins." Elara stepped forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't have Reed's confidence, but she could see that the rebellion's leaders were right to be suspicious. She was an outsider here, someone who had been a part of the empire they fought against. But if there was any chance of making a difference, of bringing the author empire to its knees, she would have to prove herself. "I'm not just here to hide," Elara said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "I'm here to help you take down the empire. I know its inner workings, its weaknesses. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to bring my father's reign to an end." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, one by one, the resistance leaders exchanged glances. Finally, the tall man spoke again. "Welcome to the rebellion, Princess Elara," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Let's see what you're made of." The infiltration begins. The days following Elara's introduction to the resistance were a blur of action, preparation, and constant surveillance. She quickly realized that the world of rebellion was nothing like the cushioned, well-guarded existence she had known as the daughter of the Author King. Here, in the shadows of Centurion, survival was a matter of quick decisions, subtle movements, and an unwavering commitment to a cause that spanned galaxies. Elara's initial concerns were real. She was still considered an outsider by many in the resistance, a princess of the Author Empire who could not be fully trusted, no matter what she claimed. Reed, however, worked tirelessly to gain her acceptance among the rebels. He vouched for her, spoke of her courage, and pointed to her knowledge of the Empire's inner workings as their potential edge. Despite the suspicion, the resistance began to recognize the value of her insight. The first few days were spent learning the internal dynamics of the rebellion. The leaders, Captain Aaron, a battle-hardened strategist, and Arlo, a brilliant but temperamental hacker, sought to assess Elara's abilities, testing her knowledge of Imperial tactics, the movement of resources, and the vulnerabilities in Author defenses. She proved useful on all fronts, offering intelligence on the strategic importance of Centurion and its place in the Empire's supply chain. "What you're telling us about the defenses?" Captain Aaron said one evening, reviewing a set of maps with Elara. "It's huge. If we can hit the supply depots here, we could cripple the Author fleet for months." Elara nodded, her mind still racing with the magnitude of what they were planning. They weren't just hoping to survive, they were planning a full-scale assault on one of the Author Empire's most crucial military hubs. For the first time, she felt the weight of her decision to join the rebellion. It wasn't just about personal survival, it was about taking down an empire. Still, despite her growing resolve, Elara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her father's reach was far too vast. Every strategy, every plan seemed fraught with danger. She had once been a part of that empire, and the Author were not known for their tolerance of dissent. If word reached her father that she was alive, if he found out she was aiding the rebellion, it would mark her for death. "I can't help but wonder," Elara said one night, her voice laced with concern, "how much longer we can stay hidden here. The Author have eyes everywhere." Reed sat beside her, his gaze softening as he considered her words. "You're right to be cautious. But we're not alone anymore. The Resistance has allies, pirates, mercenaries, and sympathizers from all over the galaxy. The Author Empire might be powerful, but it's not invincible." She nodded slowly, taking comfort in his words. Reed's presence had become a constant source of strength for her. He was more than just a soldier, he was someone who truly understood what it meant to fight for a cause, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. His commitment was infectious, and the longer she spent by his side, the more Elara's own resolve solidified. The day the plan was set into motion, the tension in the Resistance base reached a fever pitch. The assault on the Author supply lines was just the first part of a larger, more dangerous plan. One that, if successful, would send shockwaves throughout the Empire. But it was also a test. If they failed, it would be disastrous for everyone involved. "We hit them hard," Captain Aaron said as she briefed the team. We disrupt their supply chains, destabilize their front lines, and cause enough damage to give the rebellion the momentum it needs to spread. We'll have no room for mistakes. Reed's eyes met Ilara's, his gaze steady. You ready for this? Ilara swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment. As ready as I'll ever be. With that, the operation began. The resistance moved quickly, utilizing their network of hidden bases and underground tunnels to infiltrate key locations. Ilara had spent hours preparing the plans, mapping out the most strategic targets and routes. Her knowledge of the Author Empire was invaluable, allowing the resistance to slip through the cracks unnoticed. The first target was a supply depot hidden beneath the surface of a barren moon on the outskirts of the Author Empire. It was a place where fuel and weapons were stored, far from the prying eyes of the capital. The resistance had learned that an attack on this depot would cripple the Authoress' ability to wage war across several systems. As the team approached the moon, Ilara felt the adrenaline surge through her veins. This wasn't a simple mission. They weren't just trying to sabotage an enemy supply chain, they were taking the fight to the heart of the Empire. Reed flew the shuttle with precision, weaving through asteroid fields and past cloaking stations. Ilara felt the rush of excitement building in her chest. She had never been a part of something so significant, so dangerous. But with every passing minute, the sense of urgency became more intense. We're almost there, Reed said, his voice calm despite the situation. He had the controls in hand, his fingers dancing across the holographic console, ensuring their approach remained undetected. When they finally arrived at the depot, it was exactly as the resistance had expected. Heavily guarded, with multiple Author patrols patrolling the area. The moon's surface was cracked and scarred, with deep ravines and jagged mountains that made the perfect cover for the rebels. Ilara could see the tension in the faces of the resistance soldiers as they prepared to breach the depot. She had seen the same look on Reed's face back on Ritherix, the mix of resolve and quiet anticipation that came with knowing they were about to strike a blow against a much larger enemy. Everyone ready? Captain Aaron asked, her voice steady. The team nodded in unison. Remember your objectives, she continued. Sabotage the fuel supply first. Then hit the weapon storage. We move in fast, we move out faster. Keep your heads down and don't engage unless necessary. Ilara's heart raced. This was real. There was no going back. With a coordinated effort, the rebels descended into the heart of the Author Depot, using the cover of night and the planet's natural terrain to approach undetected. Ilara stayed close to Reed, her breath shallow as they moved through the rocky landscape, her eyes darting around for any sign of Author patrols. Finally, they reached the entrance to the depot. The door was heavily fortified, but the resistance had their own secret weapon. Arlo, the hacker who quickly began bypassing the security systems. Ilara couldn't help but marvel at the way he worked, his fingers flying across his console as he disabled sensors and opened doors in record time. 5 minutes, Arlo said, his voice laced with excitement. We're in. The team moved inside, and within moments they had set the charges on the fuel tanks. The countdown began, and the air felt thick with the anticipation of what was to come. Time to move, Reed said, his voice low as he motioned for the team to fall back. The moment they stepped out of the depot, the charges detonated. A massive explosion rocked the surface of the moon, sending shockwaves through the ground. The Author supply lines were cut off, and the rebellion had its first victory. But as the rebels retreated back to their shuttle, Ilara's thoughts were a whirlwind. This was only the beginning, there was still so much to do, so many risks to take. She had taken the first step into the heart of the Author Empire, and she couldn't afford to stop now. As Reed's shuttle lifted off, she looked out at the destruction they had left behind, a small but significant victory in the war for freedom. We're just getting started, she whispered to herself, and for the first time in her life she truly believed it. The price of rebellion. The days that followed the successful attack on the Author Depot were a whirlwind of action and planning. The explosion had made headlines across the galaxy, sending shockwaves through the Empire, but it also marked a turning point for the rebellion. The Author were not accustomed to such audacity, and their swift response revealed the cracks in their control, cracks that the rebellion was determined to exploit. However, victory came at a cost, and that price was becoming painfully clear as Ilara and Reed sat in the makeshift war room of the Resistance base. Ilara leaned over a table covered with star maps and data pads, her fingers tracing the outlines of the Author military network. The attack on the supply depot had been successful, but it had also triggered a wave of reprisals. Author forces were scouring nearby systems, tightening security on Centurion and other rebel hotspots. The Empire was determined to root out the insurgents, and they weren't about to let a simple act of sabotage go unpunished. "We've hit them where it hurts," Captain Aaron said, her voice gravelly as she paced in front of the table. "But the retaliation is coming faster than we expected. They've already deployed a task force to this sector. We need to move quickly." Reed stood beside Alara, his eyes scanning the data with the intensity of someone who had lived through countless battles. His demeanor was usually calm, even in the most dangerous situations, but Alara could sense the tension in him now. This was a critical moment. The rebels had struck a blow, but they hadn't won the war. Not by a long shot. "We have to stay one step ahead," Reed said, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "We can't afford to let them corner us." Alara nodded, her gaze focused on the holographic map in front of them. The rebellion's chances were slim, but every bit of intel she provided seemed to shift the odds just slightly in their favor. She had spent hours poring over data, remembering everything her father had taught her about the Author military, every base, every weakness, every possible vulnerability. It was both a curse and a blessing. Her knowledge of the Empire was invaluable, but it also tied her to a past that she was desperately trying to escape. "We can't afford to be complacent," Captain Aaron added, pointing at a series of red dots on the map. "If they get wind of our location, it's over. We need a diversion. Something big, something that'll keep them occupied long enough for us to slip away." Reed turned to Alara, his gaze unwavering. "You're the one who knows them best. What can we do?" Alara hesitated. Her mind raced, trying to find a solution that wouldn't cost too many lives. Her connection to the Author, however strained, gave her an edge. She had once been part of the ruling class. Her family's alliances had given her access to vital information. If she could just find a way to use that to their advantage, they might survive another day. "There's a military convoy heading to a key supply hub in the next sector," Alara said, her voice low but firm. "It's part of a larger logistical operation designed to reinforce Author forces in this region. If we can sabotage that convoy, it will disrupt their supply lines for weeks." Reed's eyes narrowed. "How sure are you?" "I've seen the convoy routes before," she replied. "I can give you a way in. But it won't be easy. They'll have heavy security and we'll need precise timing." Captain Aaron leaned in, her expression calculating. "We can't afford any mistakes. If we fail, they'll come for us with everything they've got." Alara's stomach churned. She had been prepared for the danger, but the weight of the responsibility was crushing. The rebellion was counting on her to guide them, to make the impossible happen, and every decision she made could mean life or death. But there was no turning back. She had made her choice and now she had to see it through. "We can do it," Alara said, her voice steadying. "We just need to hit them at the right moment." The plan was set. Within hours the team was ready. Reed, Captain Aaron, and a small strike force would be sent to intercept the convoy, while Alara remained behind to coordinate their movements and provide real-time intel. The shuttle was prepped, weapons loaded, and everyone knew the stakes. If they succeeded, they would cripple the Author supply chain once again. But if they failed? Alara pushed the thought out of her mind. There was no time for doubt. As the team made its way to their designated strike point, Alara remained in the war room, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the weight of her decisions bearing down on her as she watched the shuttle's progress on the holographic map. The hours felt like an eternity, each minute stretching longer than the last. She could feel the rebellion's collective breath held, waiting for the outcome. And then the call came. "Alara," Reed's voice crackled through the comms, urgent but steady. "We've got company. Author forces are on our tail. We need to move, now." Her pulse quickened. "How far are you from the convoy?" "2 clicks, Reed replied. "We'll be in position soon, but we need to clear the area first." "They're not alone." Alara's mind raced. The Author forces were closing in faster than she'd anticipated. She quickly checked the satellite feeds, searching for a way to help. "Reed, there's a blind spot in their patrol route about 3 kilometers from your position. If you can make it there, I can hack into their communications and scramble their sensors. You'll have a better chance of getting close enough to hit the convoy." Reed's voice was sharp but grateful. "Got it. Stay with me. We'll make it work." Alara watched as the markers on the map shifted, following Reed's shuttle and the approaching Author patrols. Her hands trembled slightly as she accessed the communication grid, quickly typing in a series of commands. The tension in her chest grew with each passing second, each signal flashing across the screen as her fingers worked to disrupt the Author's advanced tech. "Alara," Reed's voice returned, this time tinged with frustration. "The patrol's almost on us. We need that window now." Her heart raced, a bead of sweat trickling down the side of her face. "Almost there," she whispered to herself. Almost there. Then with a final tap of the keys, the authoress surveillance system went dark. Ilara exhaled sharply. The scramble would give Reed and the strike force just enough time to get in position. Do it now. Ilara ordered, her voice shaking with anticipation. Reed's shuttle surged forward, and a flash of blinding light lit up the holographic map as explosions rippled across the convoy's convoy. The Author forces were caught off guard, their response delayed just long enough for Reed and his team to take advantage. Direct hit, Reed said, his voice tense but triumphant. The convoy's down. We've got a chance to slip out of here before reinforcements arrive. Ilara felt a surge of relief flood through her, but she knew the danger wasn't over yet. The Author would come for them no matter how much damage they'd caused. The battle was far from won. As Reed's shuttle maneuvered back to the safety of the rebel base, Ilara allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The mission had been successful, but the cost of rebellion was becoming ever more apparent. Every victory meant more enemies, more bloodshed, and more sacrifices. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: there was no turning back. The Author Empire would fight back, and so would the rebellion. And Ilara, once the princess of a vast and powerful empire, now found herself at the heart of a revolution that could change the galaxy forever. The cost of freedom. The return to the resistance base was met with a tense silence. The mission had been successful, but only just. Reed's shuttle touched down in the hidden landing bay with a quiet hiss, and as the team disembarked, the air seemed thick with the weight of their victory. The rebel soldiers were all smiles, but Ilara could see the exhaustion and grim determination behind their eyes. They knew what this victory would mean, both for the rebellion and for the Author Empire's response. Ilara stood at the edge of the landing bay, watching as the strike force disembarked, Reed among them. His expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. He walked toward her with purpose, his boots echoing on the cold metal floor. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with something she hadn't expected: pride. Ilara nodded, but the words stuck in her throat. The sense of accomplishment she thought would come with the mission's success was swallowed by the harsh reality of what they had done. They had crippled an important Author supply route, yes, but they had also signed their own death warrants. The Empire wouldn't forget this. Did we? Ilara asked softly, her gaze flickering toward the rest of the team, who were gathering their gear and talking among themselves. The chatter was subdued, but there was an underlying excitement. They had succeeded, but they all knew the cost. Reed's expression softened as he stepped closer to her, his voice dropping. "It's not the victory that matters, Ilara. It's the message. We're not just fighting to survive anymore. We're fighting to win." Her heart twisted at his words. She wanted to believe him, to believe that they could win. But the Author were ruthless, and they wouldn't take this defeat lightly. Every victory in this war had the potential to bring down far more than they could possibly expect. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice cold with a determination she didn't fully feel. "They'll come after us with everything they have." Reed didn't argue, but he didn't look away. "Yes, they will. But they don't know what we've got now. This was a message, like I said. The Author Empire is used to ruling with an iron fist. They're not prepared for this kind of fight." Ilara met his gaze, her own resolve slowly hardening. She had once been a part of the Empire, the Authoress Future as her father had called her. Now she was a rebel, a fighter, someone who had chosen to stand against the very empire that had been her life's foundation. Every day she stayed with the resistance, it felt like she was losing a piece of herself, the Ilara she had once been. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt since she left home: hope. Hope that the Author could be defeated, that she could have a future beyond the one her father had planned for her. "We've got work to do," Captain Aaron said, interrupting her thoughts. She approached, her face set in a grim but resolute expression. "This win won't last long if we don't keep the pressure on. We need to prepare for the Empire's retaliation. And we need to make sure we don't leave any trace of where we are." Ilara nodded, following the captain's lead. There was no time for rest. Every moment they stayed in one place made them more vulnerable. They needed to move to keep the Empire off their scent. And yet, as the hours passed, it became clear that the retaliation would come sooner than anyone had expected. The following morning, the atmosphere in the base shifted. The tension was palpable, every soldier on edge, their movements more deliberate, their conversations quieter. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. The Author were coming. They had to be ready. Ilara spent the next few hours poring over new intelligence with Arlo, the Resistance's brilliant hacker. His fingers flew over the holographic displays as he worked to scramble their communications and hide their movements. The author had a vast network of spies and infiltrators, and they needed to keep their movements cloaked if they were going to survive the next few days. "There's no guarantee this will work," Arlo muttered, eyes narrowed as he worked. "The authoress' counterintelligence is good, but it's not perfect. We've got some options, but they're risky." Ilara stood beside him, watching the screens flicker and shift. She had no doubt that the author were already looking for them. Every failed attempt to break their encryption, every missed opportunity for a quick strike, they knew they were being hunted. "It's the best we've got," Ilara said. "Just make sure they don't find us before we can act." Arlo didn't reply, but she could see the effort in his eyes. This was as much a gamble for him as it was for her. They were all in this together, pawns in a game that was far bigger than any one of them. And yet, it was their lives on the line, every moment of it, and every time they made a decision, it meant more. The next few days blurred together in a haze of movement and preparation. The rebellion shifted base locations multiple times, always staying one step ahead of the authoress' pursuit. Ilara became a part of the Resistance's core planning, advising on tactics and strategies, using everything she knew about the Author Empire to ensure their survival. But it was becoming harder to ignore the gnawing feeling of dread at the back of her mind. The Empire's forces were vast, their reach nearly infinite. Every victory they won came with a cost, and she knew that if they stayed on the defensive for too long, the Author would find a way to crush them. It was only when Reed returned from a mission, his face grim and his voice hollow, that Ilara truly understood how high the stakes had become. "We've lost contact with several of our outposts," he said quietly. "The Author are closing in on us faster than we thought. They're using everything they've got." Ilara's heart sank. It was one thing to fight an empire that had a weakness, but to face an empire that was relentlessly organized, one that would burn entire systems to the ground to root out rebellion, was something entirely different. "We can't outrun them forever," Ilara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "No. But we can make them pay for every inch of ground they take." Ilara nodded, her resolve hardening once again. This was the life she had chosen, and it was a life of constant war, constant sacrifice. There was no guarantee of survival, only the promise of a fight that would echo across the galaxy. The Author Empire was a monster, and it wouldn't be easily defeated. But the rebellion had something they didn't: hope. And hope, no matter how small, was the first step toward freedom. "We're in this together," she said, her voice strong. Reed smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. Together. And as the Author Empire's forces drew nearer, Ilara knew that her path was set. She had crossed a line that could never be undone, but in doing so, she had also found something more powerful than the rule of an empire: the will to fight for something worth living for. She wasn't just the rebellious daughter of an alien king anymore. She was a fighter, a symbol of defiance against a system that had once controlled her, now determined to bring that system down no matter the cost. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.